The 2025 First Friday season turns the volume up on sound and music. We'll tap into our relationship with music and how it affects our bodies and lives. Now, on behalf of NHM, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our host and moderator for the First Friday season, driven by a mission to redefine where science, storytelling belongs, and a belief in the power of science to connect people and communities. I personally want to thank them for being a wonderful collaborator here for our discussions. Please give a big hand to neuroscientist and science communicator, Dr. Yewande Pearse.
Thank you, Marisol, and hello everyone, and welcome to First Fridays and tonight's very special discussion because we have actual, literal nature sounds. So this evening's discussion, Sound and Nature, invites us to explore the hidden acoustic world all around us. From the rustling leaves of Asian aspen groves to the wing beats of millions of bats, sound connects us to our environment in ways that we often overlook. Tonight, we'll discover how listening more deeply can reveal nature's secrets, foster conservation, and reconnect us with the wild, even in urban spaces. We'll explore what nature truly sounds like, how these soundscapes are changing, and what they might teach us about our relationship with the living world. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for tonight's discussion. Please welcome Jeff Rice. Jeff is a Seattle-based sound artist and journalist specializing in wildlife recording. His work has been featured in museums, libraries, and media outlets across the country, including the New York Times, the LA Times, Outside Magazine, and NPR. He is co-founder of the Acoustic Atlas at Montana State University. Thank you so much for joining the discussion this evening, Jeff.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here.
It's really fun to have you. It's also really fun to be in charge of the clicker this evening. I hope everything goes smoothly. So just a little introduction to what we're seeing here. So sweeping across 107 acres of Utah's Fish Lake National Forest, Pando is one of the world's largest and oldest living organisms, a massive grove of 47,000 genetically identical aspen trees that all stem from a single root system. Estimated to be at least 10,000 years old, Pando is also the heaviest known organism, weighing about 13 million pounds. So Pando is in many ways defined by its sound. Its species name, quaking aspen, comes from the trembling of its leaves, and I know that sound specifically is very personal to you, Jeff, because of your childhood spent hiking in Utah and the familiar sounds of rustling of the aspen grove. You had the opportunity to capture its sound in 2022. And that was as part of an artist residency with Friends of Pando. So I'd love to start our discussion here and just take a listen to what some of those leaves sound like up close. So that's the sound of the leaves.
It's a very traditional kind of nature recording.
Very soothing.
Sort of almost like the sound of rain or a river flowing. But that's the sound of millions of leaves. It's very personal to me just because that's really what I think of as the sound of the West. But it's also very subtle. And, you know, one of the more, as I say, traditional types of nature sound recordings that I've made. But so you imagine, you know, millions of leaves blowing in the wind, and this is actually a picture of Pando, and what you see up there in the picture are not trees individually, but those are all stems coming up from a big root system, a huge root system that would probably stretch around the world if you could
Wow.
let it, stretch out. And that's all underground, connecting all of these different branches and making it, a single organism. And so when you hear those leaves above ground, it's very subtle. But there's also a lot going on underground that we also recorded. And this is what you're about to hear is the sound of millions of leaves, those same leaves that you just heard, but heard underground, literally vibrating the earth.
These are the roots, and I just like to highlight your point. So these look like trees, but these are the roots that have, nature is incredible, have decided to just sprout back up through the earth and appear in this form. And what we're about to listen to is underneath the
Yeah.
soil and what's happening. Let's do it. Wow, it's quite the contrast. It could be
Right.
anything. It sounds like the rumbling of an earthquake or
Right.
trains underground or something like that.
And that's, millions of leaves all shaking and vibrating and passing through those branches down into the earth and literally shaking the earth and the roots. And it's something that we recorded with using a hydrophone by, placing a hydrophone underneath the tree. And, when I first came to Pando, I started with the leaves, but I knew that I wanted to create a sound portrait of the entire organism. And I was thinking, like, how do you approach that? How do you record something that's the size of a forest? What does that mean to record that? And so I tried to come at it from all kinds of different angles, from what was the sound that was going on above ground, and then the animals and the water and the weather and all that kind of stuff, and then also trying to capture the sound of those roots. And we didn't know what was going to happen. I just had this idea that I would try to record the roots, but it was just, I was able to find a place to connect with them, and I was really surprised to hear what came about.
And I'd love to take a step back and actually just talk about this opportunity, because this is pretty epic. Like, a lot of your work is super awe-inspiring, and this was done in collaboration with friends of Pando. So in going into this project, when you did your artist residency, what were you hoping to discover? Like, what's the story behind recording Pando?
It was more of an exploration. As I said, it really, I had come there before to record the leaves, and that was for a project that the New York Times sent me out to do called Sonic Voyages, where the New York Times Magazine did all these trips around the world to places and captured sounds. And I had sort of parachuted in, never been to Pando before, and I had to record those leaves and come back with that. And I knew that I wanted to come back and explore it some more. And so I got an artist residency at a group called Friends of Pando. And the idea was just to create a sonic portrait of this unique organism the size of a forest.
I love the term, by the way, a sonic portrait, because it really is something that creates a visual when you hear it.
Yeah. And so what that meant was just I showed up with a suitcase full of microphones of all different types, surround sound mics, and we were pulling bark off the tree, to capture the sound of that, and it was just an exploration, I think, and we found quite a lot of surprises in the process of that.
Yeah, because I feel, because this was, I mean, this was in collaboration, but this idea of kind of going on this journey of discovery, there was also, I guess, some scientific intentions as well. But it sounds like the discovery was more at the forefront, so you really didn't know what you were what you
Yeah,
were looking for
it was
specifically.
more of an explorer, you know, like I
Yeah.
wasn't doing science per se, but I wanted to, see what would happen. And I knew that people have recorded the roots of trees before, and um, now going and trying to record the roots of something like that is uh, really abstract. And fortunately, I had a guide who knows the entire uh, forest, Pando, and um, he was able to show me a place where I could actually connect to the roots. And we have a picture of that actually, which we sort of call the portal to Pando. Just a hole.
I love the neck. It's very dramatic. I like
Uh,
it.
it's just a hole in the base of one of these branches, and you can see the microphone cord is sticking out, and that just goes down into some mulch-like material that was kind of chewed out by something and connects with the roots. And we waited for a big thunderstorm to come in and really start blowing the leaves and getting it going. And then suddenly we just had this amazing rumbling drone-like sound. Yeah.
And so just to reiterate, that's because, yeah, it is an abstract idea, recording roots, but you're really recording the vibration. So this is really from the leaves down to the roots and what you're capturing there. But you also, I wonder if there are any other surprises as well through kind of taking this alternative way of recording.
There was one especially that came out. So I took that root recording back to the studio and started listening back to it, and suddenly I just almost got knocked out of my chair when I heard this little sound coming out of the root system, almost like a little voice.
It's kind of eerie.
And I don't know if you have that queued
Yeah,
up.
I think we can take a listen. We have that sound.
You can sort of hear the thunder in the background.
I mean, what is that? It's paired with that picture.
I have no
I want to
idea.
go nowhere near Portal of Pando at all.
Yeah, I thought it was Pando speaking to me. I was.
That is super eerie.
So yeah, I really don't know what it is, and that's the kind of thing when you're exploring with microphones and recording things, you often come across things that you really don't know what they are. I mean, it's still a pioneering kind of field. I suspect it's some kind of a beetle. It may have been,
Okay, beetle I can deal with.
Yeah. Alien, I don't know.
Also possible, you never know.
So your guess is as good as mine.
Well, actually, backstage, I was asking Jeff, sort of, how do you, because you set up your mic and then you disappear, and then you have to. I thought, okay, you have to listen to 5 hours of a recording. Do you multitask, like wash the dishes while you're doing that? But you actually pointed out that you look for specific features on the recording.
Yeah, spectrograms are very helpful.
And so for this little creature, you would have seen a huge peak.
Right. Yeah. I was. There'd be a line just kind of like this, and then all of a sudden a jump in the recording, and you go there and you say, "What is that? That's exciting." And I've often found interesting things that way.
That's fantastic. I mean, seeing Pando, we've seen the image. It must be just so humbling. But I'm just wondering also what capturing its sound adds to the understanding of it. Because you could just look at it and be completely awe-inspired. But what do you feel like the sound really adds to these experiences in nature?
But in this case, I think it really brings home the connectedness of Pando. How can this thing that's looks like a forest and it's made up of all these individual pieces be one organism and connected? And I think capturing the root sounds, really brings that home, the leaves to the roots. There were so many other ways too that I felt connected to Pando, because I'm like, well, when I'm walking through Pando, I'm part of this organism. I'm walking through an organism. I'm connected to it as well. And so recording is just this way of finding these connections.
That really resonates. And we've just looked at sort of Pando and kind of recording these incredible sounds, but I think one of the things that strikes me is that really what you hear is shaped by the way that you're recording. So I'd love to explore a little bit more about your techniques and processes and how they've evolved over time. So we've discussed about the vibrations of the leaves creating this rumbling, but I'd love to kind of switch focus and think about capturing the movements and voices of the animal kingdom, which I think is super interesting. So you've recorded the largest gathering of mammals on Earth. This is 20 million bats returning to the Bracken Cave in Texas, another eerie image, which I don't know if I would fare too well in. Let's just take a listen to what that sounds like. Again, super epic. So I can't wait for us to dive into how you record these wildlife sounds. So you mentioned already that you use the ambisonic microphones, and that affects both the accuracy of the sounds you capture and, importantly, their emotional impact, like the fact that you feel like you're so close to these sounds. How do you ensure that we're truly hearing what is there and not an artifact, and nothing's being embellished but truly captured?
Right. So to give that sound a little bit of context, that was recorded with an ambisonic microphone, as you mentioned, which is sort of a surround sound microphone, but it's actually captures an entire sphere of sound. So it captures the sound from above and below and all the way around. That's the sound of the bats actually returning to the cave from above, and they're just diving in to this cave opening, and that's the sound of their wings just zooming right by the microphone, and it's incredible to hear it in an ambisonic listening space.
So the two are paired, so you can have an ambisonic mic, but also to really truly experience that sort of 360 effect. It's
right.
It's a sound experience.
Like the most accurate way of recording something is through the ambisonic, in my opinion. And to play it back is really awe-inspiring and emotional. I listened to it in the DX Art Studio at University of Washington, and they have like 32 speakers set up in a dome. And you can just hear and feel the bats coming in from above and flying down into the cave, and having that microphone set up right where they are. It's not the kind of experience that you would normally get. The microphone gives you takes you to a place that you couldn't normally be.
And because you took this image, didn't you? When you were, so the experience of being there and visually, I mean, it's incredible, but also when you listen back to the sound, how do the two sort of pair up for you? Is it transformative? Is it even more, do you feel even more kind of impact to that experience when you listen back?
Yeah, it's like taking a piece of Bracken Cave back with you, and being able to revisit it again and again. And this picture actually is the bats leaving the cave. And that's an incredible sight. And that actually sounds a little bit more subtle, like just the little flickering of all the bat wings and things. Yeah. And I wish you could smell it too.
Oh gosh, what does it smell like?
That's something I'm glad I didn't take back with me, because it is really powerful. I mean,
wow.
And that's one aspect of it. But the other thing too is that there's imagine all those bats. I also used a bat detector which captures the ultrasonic sounds. So
Wow.
you heard the wings and the sound of the wings flying, but above your hearing range, all those bats, every single one of them is screaming like as loud as a smoke detector.
Fun.
You know, I mean, it is, and so I turned on my bat detector to capture that, and the thing just almost just melted down.
Oh my goodness.
So if you could actually hear it, I don't know what 50,000 hertz, or I forget what the level is, it would just be overwhelming.
Unbearable.
The sound of all those bats screaming in the night. And that's hard to capture, I did get a recording of the bat detector freaking out.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it would be cool to hear it, but I'm glad that we're listening to the wing sounds instead.
Yeah.
So just the capturing the bat sounds is just one example of how you use the ambisonic microphone to really accurately, like you said, take a piece of bracken home with you. But you've also recorded a bison herd in the prairie using the same technique, which we have an incredible recording of. This is actually one of my favorites. I feel like there is a bison behind me. It's really, really powerful. It really does kind of consume you, and
Yeah.
it feels so close.
And
Could you
you
talk?
should-
Yeah, could you
yeah,
talk
you-
us through kind of that recording and how that might have differed a little bit?
And you should really hear that in the ambisonic dome, because it's like literally they're all around you, and essentially this was recorded up in Montana at the American Prairie Reserve, and I was able to get permission to take an ambisonic mic and put it out in a place where I thought the bison would go. We weren't sure, had an expert guiding me, and he's like, well, let's try putting it over there, and they might.
I want to ask what your insurance is like for this equipment.
We don't talk about that. But I was a little nervous, whether my $5,000 microphone was going to get
Right.
stomped by a bunch of bison. But I felt like it was worth trying, and I set it up, and they did in fact kind of coalesce around it, and you can just hear them coming up from behind you, and then suddenly you're surrounded by them, and it's one of those recordings where you could never really do that as a person, or you probably wouldn't want to be in that situation. So, it wouldn't be safe. But the microphone is there, and it puts you in that place that you could never be. That's a term I heard Chris Watson, the nature recordist, use, where he said, the place that you could never be. It's a really nice description of a lot of these recordings, and what the microphone gives you access to these things. And the bison they just really performed for us that
I mean,
day.
I love that recording. It's just it feels so visceral and really real. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites. But I'm also wondering, Jeff, what your feelings are about how these recordings, sort of what they really reveal about ecosystems that we wouldn't perceive otherwise. So kind of getting to be where you can't be. But what does that actually tell us about these ecosystems?
Well, I mean, nature recording tells us so many things about the environment. It's a great way of monitoring the environment. Sound is really, the scientists are discovering that they can just record a field, and suddenly they've identified all these different
So much
species.
data, yeah.
But from my perspective, it just it draws me into a new place that I haven't experienced before, and that's really what keeps me going, is this idea of exploration. And there, a lot of things just haven't been recorded very much, and it's a chance to get out there and hear things in a new way.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue to the next topic that I wanted to go into, which is that nature soundscapes. I think we can all agree they're really deeply immersive and personal, and I mean we turn to them for relaxation, sleep. My daughter uses a hatch, which is literally just like animal sounds, and one of the most beloved, I think, nature sounds that we're really familiar with is bird sounds. So just as we kind of move into thinking about why we connect so much to these soundscapes, let's just play a little bit of one of your bird sound recordings. So relaxed. That's so nice. This is so nice. Undeniably relaxing.
And he goes on for like a minute too. Like,
What's
that's
he
one of my
chatting about?
one of my favorite. Yeah, that's a sage thrasher out in eastern Washington, and yeah, it's funny. You know, we think about nature sounds as being relaxing, and they are to listen to. But when you're out recording, nature sound recording is a different experience, and that's to get that recording meant, you know, like crawling on my hands and knees through sagebrush to try to get close to this bird, and you know, in the early morning, you know, and there's a lot that goes into it that's not very relaxing, you know, ultimately, but the result is really satisfying when you get it, and that's one of my favorite birds.
Yeah, I mean, there's an irony to that. It's like the behind the scenes. So it sounds so pure. It does really give this impression of untouched nature, and we'll talk about sort of how our impact kind of affects that. But I think one thing to sort of point out is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but I mean, you capture these pure sounds, but for everything we've heard so far, you've actually been surrounded by potential interference and have had to sort of find that purity amongst all of that.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, you know, with like, you know, as I was talking about the recording of the pando, you know, like in order to get those leaves, you needed to have everything going perfectly. You need to have the wind and the connected to the tree, and then all the you couldn't have the cars driving by, and you know, and you're always dealing with human interference when you're doing nature recording, but it's just part of the job, you know.
The satisfaction,
Yeah.
I'm sure, of actually getting it.
And like that bird was, you know, near a highway, and I had to kind of find the right angle to get it so that I didn't get the highway in there. And recording is a little different from photography in that sense. Like, it's photography, you can kind of just turn away from the road,
Right, not happening. Yeah.
and you know, get like this beautiful vista or something, and you never know that there's a road right there. But with recording, that road is going to come in, and those cars and everything is going to be in there.
Which is, I think, part of. I mean, we're going to talk now about empathy with nature, but I think that purity is what helps us to connect with nature. But the reality is something that I think we need to acknowledge in order to be able to truly connect with nature.
Yeah.
I mean, the recordings that you capture, you could describe as like these textured dialogues, like the bird and sort of the bird song. So they're these dialogues of the natural world. But how do you feel like capturing these sounds actually does cultivate a sense of empathy for you? Just obviously you're very passionate about the work you do, but
Yeah, I think empathy is really fundamental. And my wife, who's a musician, actually pointed out, like, listening is almost the definition of empathy. You know, listening is something where you're trying to understand something, and that's why I record. Is I want to understand nature. And in order to make recordings, you have to really do it. You have to get into the mindset of the species that you're recording and understand why they're calling or doing what they're doing. And there's so many different things that have to come together For that bird to be recording, for example, for that bird to be singing, it had to be a certain time of the year in the spring. I think it was in April or May. Certain time of day, and that bird going out there and singing is really putting itself at risk. This is a big moment for that bird, and so as you understand what's going on with these species, you really, you can take it to heart, like what a special thing it is to actually capture that bird, singing at that moment, and at where you are, and I think that's, that really makes you appreciate the fleeting and nature of it and the specialness of getting these recordings. That bird is only going to live for a few years, and he's only going to have a few chances to sing its heart out like that. And then you think as a recordist, like, well, how many chances am I going to have to actually be there at the right time to get that, and that's empathy, that's feeling like connected.
And that link as well to the awe, and also those bird sounds, they adapt over time to kind of account for urbanization. So capturing them in that moment is also something that is changing. But I'm just curious as well about your childhood, and sort of before you had the equipment that allows you to do this professionally, sort of if you had any of those early experiences where those sounds inspired you.
Probably the reason that I'm doing this is because when I was a kid, I used to hear Pacific chorus frogs, in the distance when I grew up in Western Washington. And, just as a 8 or 9-year-old, just being drawn to the woods and hearing this like jungly, drone of amphibians was really mysterious to me, and it was really drew me out there, and I've sort of been chasing that my whole life, that experience, and trying to understand what that meant. Just a kid that liked frogs, I guess, but yeah.
I think also what's interesting is that like the sound does kind of connect you to animals, but here at the Natural History Museum, one of the really special things is that there's a lot of creatures and that aren't actually with us anymore, and you see the bones and they're incredibly awe-inspiring, and you're just like blown away by the dioramas, and it still creates that sort of awe and empathy. But it actually made me wonder about kind of how you use sound, or you bring in the sounds that are available today to ascribe that quality to something like a dinosaur, and what the dinosaur sounded like, and if that changes our relationship to understanding those.
Yeah, and I've done some work for different natural history museums, and one of the things I've been assigned to do is make dinosaur sounds, and that's a lot of fun, and trying to understand, like, what did these extinct species sound like in the past, and one of the ways we did it was to slow down bird song, which are modern dinosaurs, and they make a great dinosaur if you slow it down and lower the pitch a little bit.
And I mean, just together, even when you sort of see these recreations, the sound is so important because it really does help you to connect with them. And I mean, even though we can't decipher what animal sounds are, you can if you're an expert, I guess, with bird songs. But I mean, we know that the sound of nature has impact on our physiology, and we have like this biophilia towards nature. So it does kind of reduce our stress and enhances positive emotions. But I think there's also a deeper level as well, which is kind of what it tells us about how we are specifically kind of connected to nature, and sort of what your feelings are about that, having sort of studied these sounds. Like, what is the real depth of our true relationship with these sounds that we can experience?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, and I don't have any sort of definitive answer to that question, but I could talk about it for an hour. You know, I mean, because it's so mysterious and so interesting. But I think, you know, in some ways it boils down to just how important hearing is. Hearing as a sense, you know, is like just so fundamental to all species, and as well as us. You know, it's one of our primary alert systems. It's, you know, back thousands of years ago, it was, you know, really important to be able to hear whether a tiger was going to come and, you know, get you from, you know, that rustling. What's that rustling sound in the grass? You know, and there's something core to our being that where listening and hearing is very important. And so, you know, it's just this really old part of ourselves, and I think that's important for animals too. You know, we're all tied into that. You know, ever since we were dinosaurs, I guess.
Absolutely, and also, I mean, you've mentioned before kind of how we use these sounds to understand our environment and how it changes. So like, there's a really deep level to how we connect with sound, and it's one sense, but I guess there are many different ways to connect, even in the absence of sound. But sound has a specific function, but it carries all of this information and data from a scientific perspective and sort of teaches us about our changing environment. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how that kind of the interconnection between how we hear sounds and how they're changing, and sort of in recording them, sort of what you're learning and these changing environments. And I know specifically one of your most interesting projects was going to record the descendants of the toads that were calling the night before the first atomic test in New Mexico, which is incredible. So what did you discover when recording on the White Sands Missile Range? Because that's a really great example of like the historical change of like the recording of this specific species.
Well, to give that some context, this whole quest came about because of a sort of a throwaway comment that Robert Oppenheimer's brother, Frank Oppenheimer, made about the night of the test.
And this is where you
are. This picture right here, yeah. This is actually base camp where all the scientists were stationed back in 1945. It looks, you know, pretty abandoned right now, but it was bustling. It was a bustling place back then. And Frank Oppenheimer just mentioned that the night before the test, it had rained, and the whole area was just filled with toads everywhere, and they were calling and just making a huge racket. And that just struck me as like really interesting, you know, all this stuff coming together, this very important event, but still being situated in nature. You know, the ultimate technology, you know, the technological achievement that these scientists are trying to accomplish, that, you know, essentially playing God.
Changing the course of
the history, but they're still situated in nature. You know, there's still those toads are witness to that whole experience, and so I thought it would be interesting to see if I could find the descendants of those toads. You know, are there still toads at base camp? And it sort of turned into this like multi-year quest. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. But you know, after a couple of years, I was able to actually, you know, get there at the right time and find, you know, yes, the toads were still calling.
It's such a cool fun fact, I guess, which wasn't in the film, but I love your point about sort of no matter what we're kind of enduring, you're still having to contend with nature.
Yeah. If you want, well, I was going to say, if you want to queue up.
Yeah, you have this image.
Photo,
this is what you had to do to capture that sound.
Right. So in order to, you know, get those recordings, a lot of things had to come together. These toads in the desert, they stay underground for as long as 7 years, waiting for the rain to come. And in this large desert area, you get these monsoons that happen, but they might only be over a square mile or something. They might not, it might be raining buckets where you are, but just a mile away, nothing's going on, or even less. Yeah. And so in order for me to capture those toads, it had to rain on that exact, spot at base camp. And
There's a tall order.
yeah, and so I had a person that was helping me, and I was like, just tell me if it ever rains there, I will go and I will fly from Seattle, and I will I'll get on a plane tomorrow, and I will drive there, and see what I can find. And because nobody really even knew whether there were toads there, and so finally somebody called me and said, yeah, it rained. And so I was like, I just hurried over there as fast as I could. And a couple of days later, I was at base camp, and I saw that there was water in the ditches, and that whole ditch right there is full of tadpoles. But I was worried that maybe I'd gotten there too late, and I wanted to just identify what species of toads were they, and I had this crazy thought like, well, maybe I'll put some of those tadpoles in a jar and I'll take them back with me.
To the lab.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just like, I came all the way here. I must know what these toads, what species they were, and so fortunately it got dark, and suddenly, I was worried that maybe all of the activity was over, but there were still some toads calling, and it was like this. For me, it was this really triumphant moment.
Let's take a listen to these are the descendants of the witnesses of the first atomic bomb. Okay,
Yep.
Let's take a listen. That must have been so satisfying when you realized that you meant everything aligned and you were able to capture those.
Yeah, I was. Those are green toads, and yeah, it's hard to describe, but it's one of those moments where you're thinking like, what am I doing out here? I'm on this like top secret military base, because you still need like the security clearance to go on there, and I'm out here trying to record these toads, but yeah, it was a great moment. And yeah, I should say that probably the night of the test, there might have been even more toads calling. Like it might have been like this cacophony of 5 different species, but we know that those are some of them.
And they're so elusive as well that you can hear them, but you wouldn't see them, because they do. I think it's incredible. They only come up, what was it, like every 7, like it could be 7 years,
7 years
until
yeah.
they kind of come up, which is incredible.
They're waiting for the rain to fall, and they feel the vibration of the rain hitting the ground, and they come up. And I actually had a funny story about somebody that they were in the desert camping, and they were around the campfire, and they were playing their guitar, stomping their feet, going like that, and all of a sudden the toads started to come up.
That must have been quite a surprise.
Yeah, thinking that it must have rained.
But also such a treat, since they're so elusive. Recording the toads, like that must have been like a career highlight, being able to capture that. And I really like your quite profound comment about how like the transient nature of sound in the natural world is interconnected with human culture. So no matter what is happening, nature will be there. It's also true of the opposite. So sometimes nature is there, but so are the humans. So recording these nature sounds, as we've touched on already, isn't always so simple, because we live amongst nature and there is interference. So I just wanted to play your recording of cicadas, which has been a little bit more challenging because that's in a more urban environment. We can play that sound.
And that's really what it sounds like when you're there. I mean, it's that loud.
It's making me feel weird. Cicadas are incredible. So how do you see the balance between the built and natural world reflected in your recordings? And is it something that you've come to love and appreciate, or is it, I mean, do you embrace it, or is it more of an inconvenience?
It's tricky, you know. Like, I think you have to appreciate natural sound everywhere. You can appreciate it in urban environments and as well as like the most, you know, pristine environments. As a nature recordist, you know, obviously you would prefer in most cases not to have that. And noise pollution is a real problem, you know, for animals too. Talk about empathy. If you want to, you know, really understand what animals are going through, try to be a nature recordist, because you know, you become hyper aware of all these human sounds that intrude on us, and so it's a big deal. And I try not to be, you know, too much like one of those people that's just like, get off my lawn, right. You know, well, stop making your sounds, because you know, I'm part of this human race too, and I'm making sounds of my own, and I do think we could have fewer, you know, leaf blowers or you know, cars without mufflers or things like that. But this is a picture of those cicadas, and this was a recording environment that was kind of challenging in Illinois. And I'll tell you a little context about the cicadas. Actually, this was last year during the double brood, and so 2 broods of cicadas, one 13-year cycle and the other on a 17-year cycle, were calling at the same time, and so I was able to capture that in Illinois, and it was in this cemetery, Pioneer Cemetery.
Cicada sounds are, I think, one of the most powerful. Like, even when you're listening live, it's because and they're often you can't see them, so you can just hear them.
Yeah,
it's amazing. I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, so we'll wrap up. But just my last question, I guess, Jeff, is kind of in thinking about how we live in nature, and I think we need to be more reflective about how we do that, but also enjoying nature sounds without the equipment and without having to kind of jump on a flight to get to a remote place to record sounds. What's your take home for sort of appreciating nature sounds, like where we are now?
I think just understand, you know, that what a great opportunity is when you do hear like an animal, like a bird or a toad or somebody calling. What a special thing that is, because so many things had to happen for that to come together, and so, you know, just understand that and seek it out. You know, nature sounds are a great window, a great door into understanding nature, and so I encourage everybody to do that, and also encourage everybody to protect the planet. I mean, that's my ultimate takeaway, is that we need to do so much more to protect these animals and the place that we live, because it matters to them, it matters to us, and I know that people are here because they appreciate that, and I'm speaking to people that already probably know that message, but I really want to emphasize we all need to step up and protect the world around us.
Absolutely, and thank you for, your contribution to recording that and these natural portraits or these audio portraits, I feel like are so impactful. But before we wrap up the discussion, we have some time for questions. So if you do have a question, if you come down to the side, or you can actually raise your hand, I think a mic will come towards you, and an NHM staff will hold the microphone for you.
Thank you. This has been an amazing series. Now, this is kind of crazy science, but I've been hearing that they've been using artificial intelligence to decipher whales talking. Now, while that might be completely crazy, if it is true, is there any other languages that you think could be captured and understood in nature that there's actual conversations going on?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's a brave new world. I mean, there's so much going on. People are trying to decipher things like prairie dog calls, and there's lots of work going on to understand animal communication. I don't know, where AI is going to take us with that. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but it's really fascinating. I know it's really helpful too in identifying species sounds, like especially in you mentioned whales and dolphins, and it's become a real powerful tool for underwater nature sounds.
That is a great question, and we touched on this, but like the kind of the scientific element to understanding the science and the data that's in it, and how you would use that, and AI is of course boundless. So, yeah, thank you for that question. Do you have another question on the left?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for sharing with us and all the work that you've done. My question is around the distribution of frequency across species. And I have a background in audio and field recording and also mixing music. And I've spent some time in some really biodiverse natural environments. And I'm always sort of struck by the fact that it's like this perfect mix. You're getting your low ends, your mids, your high, like you don't have to struggle to hear anything. And I know we have infrasonic and ultrasonic elements happening like you described with the bats, but I wonder if that's played into any of the work that you've done at all, or if there's anything that you'd be able to share on, like if you have any information about the evolution of sound and how everything seems to have its perfect place when you're in an ecosystem with tons of species.
Well, that reminds me of Bernie Krause has the niche hypothesis, where he's done some studies of how he believes that natural sound can play into niches, kind of like where different species have different habitats. There are different sound niches. I haven't really studied that myself, but I think it's fascinating. And I do, getting back to that idea of different, spectrums of sound, like thinking about bats, thinking about how a lot of what is going on with sound we can't even hear, that's a fascinating thing to look at. What about all those hidden sounds out there?
Thank you for that question.
I have a question here. Well, I enjoyed hearing all these sounds in nature. They're really good, get us close. How do you apply all these sounds to research and improving mankind and making this a better planet?
Well, I know a lot of scientists are, certainly using sound as a way of, identifying the health of ecosystems. If there's a lot of sounds, that means your ecosystem is probably pretty healthy, and so you can identify biodiversity through soundscape recordings. And I'm not a scientist, but I know that this work is very useful to a lot of scientists that are, and it's a really cheap way of surveying the environment. Stick a microphone out, and suddenly you discover all these different creatures you didn't know were there. And yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
There must be countless opportunity for collaboration. You have so much data and recordings, and I think even with Pando, the next step would be maybe for them, because their whole focus is to try and
Yeah.
preserve and save pandas. So the discovery is step one, but then there's a scientific step.
Right, and I think these recordings raise awareness, and they prompt people to care about the environment, and that's very important. People need to care, and people need to be inspired to go and protect it.
One more question right at the back on the left.
Hi, I was just curious if you have an idea of how like loud areas such as like a freeway affect the growth of like plants or the presence of animals, like, and do plants respond to these environments in a certain way, or have you heard anything about that?
I don't know as much about plants and how that affects. I do think there's a lot of interesting work going on with plants right now and acoustics and so forth. I do know that the noise pollution and freeways is very hard on animals, and it's hard on humans too. I mean, you know, if it'll raise our
Yeah, there's a lot of
cortisol
studies
levels.
on
Yeah.
the impact of urban sounds.
So there's clearly impacts on species, including humans, and for plants, I am fascinated by plants because I've been hearing a lot about how, you know, plants can they can hear, you know, like they can grow
yeah.
towards the sound of water, you know. It's a new frontier, but I don't know about how noise pollution is affecting it.
Maybe watch the space, because we were chatting about the next Jeff interest, and plants did come up. So
Yeah,
that would be interesting to look
it's a
into.
fascinating next step.
Please join me in giving a huge round of applause to our guest, Jeff Rice.
Thank you.